Again to the Real Collective podcast. I am Brendan McKeigan. With me, as always, is Sean Tasse. If you like what you see, give us a like, subscribe, and a share. Maybe a download on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. YouTube, yeah, bark it to the streets. Let everybody know. Let everybody know. Speaking of which, our guest today is she is wonderful, and she's agreed to help us out today. Genevieve Walton. Genevieve, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Awesome. So let's get into it. Sean, why don't you tell us a little bit about why we wanted to have Genevieve on the show to begin with, and then Genevieve can introduce herself and what she does.
Yeah. So I met Jen, I guess 2 years ago, pre-COVID, and we've noticed recently this trend where we've got more and more of our clients who are wanting to buy investment properties, and so we hooked up with Jen and said, hey, what can we do to help these people out? Jen runs a property management company. Originally started with the Air BnB world, and then transitioned into more of a long-term rental. And really, what we find is that she offers really great service to her clients, and that's something that we vibe with very well. So yeah, we're happy to have you here, and happy to have you talking about what people can do. So Jen, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you for having me. This is super exciting. I apologize. My dog likes to be all over me every single time. So he's part of this podcast too. So my name's Genevieve. I started with an InterRent REIT back in 2014, doing redevelopment such as live apartments down in Ottawa here, 488 units. Learned a lot of great aspects about property management, about marketing, about sales, and about tenant retention through those programs. I then started Short and Sweet in 2017, which is Ottawa's largest Airbnb property management company. Before COVID, we had about 250 doors just running strictly on Airbnb. Now there's about 100 doors running strictly on Airbnb, and those tend to be under 30-day stays. And then throughout COVID, through that transition, I started Flex Property Development, which does traditional long-term property management, so 30 days or more, and executive furnished stays. So insurance placements, relocations for work, those sort of aspects are all under the portfolio. It tends to be, I would say, a mid-level to high-end product, the majority of them for investors and developers.
Awesome. I feel like you've given that same speech so many times because just rolled off.
I got it now.
That's great. And so you put together some things that either new or seasoned investors should look at and should think of as they roll through. So what do you mean when you say property management is there for proactive risk management and not reactive management?
So I think people, when they're purchasing homes or purchasing these investment properties, are really looking about their cash flow, or really looking about having good quality tenants that are coming in. And so we really believe that if you're proactive and mitigating your risk with property management, that you'll find qualified tenants to come into these properties. I find a lot of times when people are calling us now, it's very reactive. So they've had a flood in the property that was caused by the tenant, for example, or they have a non-paying tenant and they're looking for us to solve those issues. I think a lot of times that's a very reactive approach, and realistically, management is very, very cheap on that side. It's a small percentage of really what's coming out, but it can mitigate that risk as best as possible. So my suggestion is, especially if you're a first-time investor or if you have a large portfolio, is to put management into place as soon as possible. It does sort of give you the opportunity to leverage your time a little bit better, but it also gives you the opportunity to make sure that you have good qualified and paying tenants in there as well.
Yeah, there's been so many people that I talked to, like, oh, I don't want to be a landlord anymore because this happened, or this tenant didn't pay, or this thing happened, and it was just so much extra brain damage. But
and then you don't have to get that call at like 3:00 in the morning for a lockout or a flood or those sort of aspects. It's really cheap. It's like pretty much $100 for, depending on the unit. It's a small percentage out of it. And it gives you that peace of mind, but it also gives you time just to leverage what you do best. And that's why property management is put into place, is so that you can do your day-to-day job, or, be out there acquiring more units, and not having to worry about what the tenants are doing day-to-day or what's happening at that building.
Yeah, that's huge. And so then Go, Brendan. Were you going to say something? I feel like
No, I just we have everyone just stop talking for like 2 seconds. Like, keep going, Sean. You were on a thought train there.
Yeah, no, I was going to just hit the second point, which is it segues into sort of the ability to change the narrative about those tenant expectations. So, like you say, part of that proactive risk management is the setup, right? And I think that a lot of people, especially if they're new, like yesterday I did a podcast with a commercial agent, and he was saying, a lot of it is about the team you have, and a lot of it is about setting up and having the experience to set up what they're doing, especially if this is the first time, or even if you're doing 2 or 3. Nobody has the experience probably that you have to set up the narrative around tenant expectations, right?
Agreed. And I think if you outline those from the very beginning, it's usually a very successful tenancy. I think landlords are in such a great position right now to start to move that narrative of talking about all the wonderful tenants that are out there. Unfortunately, I believe that we're so focused on maybe 1 or 2 tenants that haven't paid rent or whatever that may be, or whatever those issues are. But there's so many wonderful tenancies that are happening day to day. There's so many wonderful tenants that are in these properties. And I think if landlords start showcasing those great tenants, they'll be in such a better spot. I think we need more investors coming in, more available rental stock as well. And we need people that are really excited about being a landlord on that side. And that starts with, I'd say seasoned investors, seasoned landlords who start changing the narrative to talk about all their great tenants that they do have.
I feel like that's life right now. I feel like people just need to celebrate the positives of life and stop complaining about all this stuff. Because you're right. It's like the 5% of people who suck are the people that we're always talking about. Like, let's talk about everybody else.
And they're great. And truthfully, there's a few obviously ones that, spoil the bunch, let's say. But I think if landlords start changing that narrative, I think you'll see more investors entering the market. And I'll think, the expectations for other tenants will be set out, that these are what landlords expect. That's why if you look, let's say it's student rentals, for example, they don't know not to pay rent. That's not built in. That's why that market is such, I would say, a great market in that sense. It's high price points. It's not a long-term tenant maybe on that side, so you can increase rent year over year, but also that moral compass. And I think people kind of forget what's morally, or legally on that side. But those students, I would say, is a great market for people to hit. But I also think right now landlords really need to start changing this narrative to get more investors into this market.
Awesome.
Yeah. And that kind of makes me think too, if it was me, because I want to get into it. Not quite there yet. We're doing our own house, so that's more of the things, but I can understand why some people might not want to. If you're like me, I'm very hands-on and I kind of want to be in there, but then also knowing that it could be very overwhelming for somebody if you don't have somebody. So if you want to grow, management just seems like it would be a vital component. You would have to have that if you want to keep going. Otherwise, you're just going to be 24/7 running your own properties.
Even I'd say one unit, especially if you don't know the landlord tenant board or the RTA or those sort of rules, I think it's at least good to get management to do a tenant placement, which is essentially where you're just doing all the screening of those tenants when they're coming in. And then maybe they take over the day-to-day management. But having a tenant that's set up for success before they come into that property will really help on that side. I think when you start to see investors that are over 5 doors, for sure, they need management at that side, because what they should be doing is out there acquiring more units or renovating their units or whatever it may be to get to their next one. So in order for them to scale, for sure, you need management on that side.
Yeah, because if you own different properties in different areas of the city, and you get a phone call for one at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then you get a phone call for the other one at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're going from Canada to Home Depot to Lowe's to, call the plumber or middleman, somebody to go and do something. It's going to get to be too much. And you just say, you know what, for the $50 a month of negative cash flow that I'm making on this property, I don't need a 3 o'clock in the morning call, right?
It's interesting when they come to you, right? Like you're talking like hundreds of thousands, even like 10,000 here or there. We're in like $50, $25 trying to bargain over on this side of management fees. But then, you have a flood, for example, it costs you, let's say 10 grand. And you're like, well, we probably could have started, if you paid for like the $75 inspection that happens twice a year to make sure that everything is tip top shape, we probably could have mitigated this. So it's a lot of, I would say, there's not that many small little increments that make a big difference in terms of your cash flow with these properties in terms of mitigating your risk.
What's the saying? Something like a penny of prevention is worth a pound of cure, or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like that. And that's, yeah. So we sort of talked about point number 4, which is sort of the proactive tenant screening, proactive maintenance. All of that is going to determine the cash flow. And we sort of talked about cash flow. We talked about RTA. So just to break it down and make it real simple, what does RTA stand for? And what does cash flow mean, Jen? Residential
Tenancy Act. So technically, there's rules that both landlords and tenants need to follow. I would say, if you're looking to become an investor, that's where you should start. It's not fun to read it, but it's very interesting, and it's very, I would say, how some things can be perceived. A good example is,
we've got a caller. Come on in. Caller, you're on the air.
Who wants to get in on this podcast, apparently. But I would say in general that, let's say 60 days notice for a tenant. So a tenant has a fixed term. They're supposed to, it's over in May. Well, it doesn't. It just goes month to month if you don't give 60 days notice. But tenants when it's their first tenancy, they're like, oh, no, my lease is done. You're like, well, that's not how it works. You had to give 60 days notice or it goes month to month. And so I think, a lot of new landlords could be put in a position where now it's, 10 days to the end of the month. And they're like, oh, I guess that's how it works. I got to find a tenant in 10 days. Well, that's not going to be a qualified tenant. There's no way. So I think when you're looking to get into that side of being a landlord, start with landlord tenant board rules, start with the RTA, start looking at exactly what those rules dictate and how you can make sure that you're set up for success too, and able to navigate your tenant as well and navigate those conversations properly.
Awesome. And just follow-up question, what's cash flow?
You got like the technical term?
No. Tell me like the layman's describing. I mean, I can do it, but I feel like I want you to.
I guess just like money coming in. It's like, I don't know. It's what we're all trying to get out of these properties. And so when people are looking, I think they're like, oh, I've got maybe like 200 or I'm at a break even for these in terms of cash flow. I don't think you're purchasing right now and seeing big returns coming back out in terms of your day-to-day cash that's coming into the properties. I think rental prices in Ottawa have plateaued. I don't think they've decreased, but I think they've plateaued. And I think what you're going to see as these more new builds start coming in over and over again, you're really going to struggle of seeing these larger rental prices. People like to talk about the lack of affordable housing or the lack of housing. I believe it's a lack of affordable housing that's out there. There is a lot of housing out there. If you look on Kijiji right now, you look at MLS, there's a lot of housing that's available. What it's lacking is maybe government assisted housing is much different of a conversation than necessarily small landlords being responsible for providing affordable housing. In my opinion, small landlords are not responsible for providing affordable housing. These are businesses on that side, which makes it harder. And so when you're looking at your cash flow, they're not making big money out of these month to month. They're at best, I'd say some of them are breaking even. Some might be making $100, $200 a month. But especially as more of these new builds start coming in these larger complexes, I think you'll start to see that rental prices will continue to either stay where they are or that they will decrease at some point. Sorry, guys.
Caller number 2.
It's still Nelson.
I mean,
Nelson's probably locked out of his Airbnb or something.
Yeah. He's calling the wrong person. So yeah, essentially cash flow is, hey, how much money are you making every month in terms of the income that the tenants are paying you from either the rental or the parking lot or the laundry unit or whatever, that, the storage locker, that's all on there. What's all of the income that's coming in, and then what are all of the expenses going out? And I think a lot of people get stuck on what the income is coming in, and they don't realize what all the expenses are going out, right? So they're not paying attention to, the cost of the mortgage, right? Which that's going up if these rates are going up, right? The insurance, the management fees, the maintenance fees, if you're going to do some of the proactive maintenance, right? All of those fees as well. If you're including all of your, utilities in the rent as well, those are all included as well. So there's a lot of expenses going out, and I think the average price for a rental right now is just north of 2,000, maybe like 2,600, right? Depending on where you are in the city. There's so many different factors that play into it. Average, but the average price of a mortgage is, for an average house in Ottawa, is probably not too far off that number, monthly payment wise. So once you start to factor in some of these other expenses that people don't take into account, there are people who are losing money, who are negative cash flowing month over month, and hoping that the appreciation is going to be there. Anyways, that's too much of a tangent. Let's talk about the fifth point here, which is the quality of the product and the effect that has.
Yeah, renovated, beautiful units for sure are going to attract a different clientele than maybe, a less expensive property that hasn't been renovated. And I think these landlords who are investing into their properties are getting back out exactly what they've invested. I mean, we say it over and over again with the Airbnbs. What you put in is what you get back out, for sure. But it's the same on the long-term side of what you're putting in is for sure attracting a different clientele over and over again. I think, you're going to start to see rental finishes increase. I think these vinyl plank flooring, I don't know. It's done to me. I think, it's overdone. The gray is done, in my opinion, at this point. But they've just overdone it on that side. It's great. It's waterproof. I totally understand why you do it. But I think you're going to start to see people transition into higher quality product and start to see them attract to these Glebe and Westboro homes that are beautiful multiplexes in these areas, and get a certain clientele. I was a big believer over COVID that obviously the downtown core took a hit, but I'm a big believer now that the downtown core is going to come back. You're starting to see it in terms of rentals right now. People are looking in the downtown core. It's very easy to rent again down here compared to before, where if you looked previously, it was these small little towns that were just booming over and over again. Well, now there's more, I'd say, investors that went down there. There's more readily available rental stock, but your pool is so small. So what you're seeing over and over again is the same tenants applying for these properties. Well, they didn't qualify a month ago. They still don't qualify, but you're just going back to that, let's say the same pond, and finding the exact same tenants. Where if you're looking in the downtown core, there's a lot more transient tenants who are coming in, students who are coming in, diplomats that are coming in. And I think the downtown core is somewhere that people should start looking for rental housing again and for purchasing.
That's a good topic, and I think that's a good spot for us to dig into in the second half, because I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about all of the new luxury rental buildings that they're building and the effect that adding all of that stock to the rental market might have, and sort of what they're building and how they're building it. But we'll dive deeper into that in the second part, I think.
Sounds good. So we'll take a quick break. If you want to talk to Sean or I, click on our Calendly links below. Again, give us a like, subscribe, and a share. Download us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And we'll be right back with Genevieve Walton.
This episode of the Real Collective podcast is brought to you by Real Collective. Real Collective brings together best-in-class real estate agents and collective experts in the field to deliver the best possible service to our clients. We govern ourselves with honesty, open-mindedness, and compassion. With diverse skill sets, our agents are able to better serve a wide array of clients, including first-time buyers, first-time sellers, transferees, estate sales, investors, and rural, vacation, and luxury properties. Authenticity and transparency are pillars of our process, which allows us to put our clients at the center of everything we do. Our years of experience and knowledge allow us to deliver prestigious service and optimal results. If you are interested in buying or selling your home, contact us today at realcollective.ca.
Welcome back, everybody, to the second half of the Real Collective podcast. Again, give us a like, subscribe, and a share. Download us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Book an appointment with Sean or I in the links below. And now we're going to get back into the second half with Genevieve Walton. Sean, you had some things that you wanted to kind of go over a little bit more at the end of the last break. So let's kick it off.
Yeah, so there has been some talk recently about I think there's like 5 big purpose-built luxury rental buildings that are planned to, I don't know if they've started to release or if they're planned to release over the next like 2 or 3 years, and what the impact will have on real estate. Caller number 3. Took your joke. Thank you. And what the effect that will have on your market and what you're seeing on the residential rental side, and the effect that it will have to force everybody else to, like you're saying, increase the level, the quality of product that they're offering back to tenants, right?
Yeah, I do believe that the market will dictate whatever consumers want in general. And I also think that it's just supply and demand. And I think for a long period of time, there's been, I would say, let's say lackluster performance of these finishes that have been going into some of these rental properties. And now, because there are more renters than ever, and it's harder to enter the market, I'd say you're going to start to see this, the level, you're going to have to escalate your expectations of these units. There's no more just like putting lipstick on these properties. Like, you definitely have to invest back in to these properties. And I think the more rental stock, obviously, the more it will plateau. So when you're looking to do added value into these properties, that means the quality of finishes needs to escalate. I think, as we were talking about before, these outskirts were so popular, but they weren't doing anything that was super innovative. They were just essentially, here's a rental, here's a rental property in these areas, and that's what it is. But I think now you'd have such a good opportunity if you went into, let's say, these small towns and did a big multiplex there. Obviously, zoning and those sort of things come into a factor, but you're starting to see some in Empire that are popping up at these larger complexes for rental housing down there. And they're brand new. The quality of finishes are there. And all that's going to do is increase this rental price a little bit higher and make it a little bit more challenging for, affordable housing. And that's where you'll start to see, in my opinion, the government step in and try to regulate these as best as possible. You're going to see a lot of new regulations. I mean, even the city of Ottawa has put in a lot of regulations over the last couple of years to try and increase the rental stock as best as possible. And I think landlords should be aware of that.
Do people go to places like Arnprior or just outside of the city limits? I don't know if Arnprior is outside of the city limits, just outside, so they avoid like what Ottawa says to do, so that they can sort of get away with more? Is that part of the appeal of being in these sort of smaller secondary markets?
I don't think so. I think that they started going down there because the purchase price was obviously lower. It was a little bit easier to pick up these properties there. And then the rents were just pretty much as high as Ottawa's downtown core. So, if you're buying, let's say, a duplex down there for 5, I mean, you're buying a duplex up here for at least 8, right? So I think, and the rents were comparable, and you could get it rented in these small towns in a second. That is sort of changing, though, I'd say, over the last period of time. I'd say the last maybe 6 or 8 months. It's a little bit harder to rent down in those areas. And it's the same, pool of tenants that you're choosing from. So those are definitely changing. And I think that's maybe why people are coming back down into the downtown core.
And do you think that the pool changes as you add better quality units and therefore have to or can get away with charging more? So like, I remember back in the 90s, everybody was putting laminate floors. And then it's like, oh, hey, we're going to do these they didn't even call them vinyl. They called them luxury vinyl, right?
They're still luxury vinyl.
Right. Well,
But LVP.
Right, exactly. But it's like, it's just laminate floors, but they're waterproof now, right?
Which is great. And I understand. And maybe if you have a basement unit, sure, give her. I understand that. But I also think that if we keep repeating the same patterns of that, you're going to get the same sort of tenants that are coming back out. But I also think that at some point, like, who's going to level up? And so when you start to see these bigger developers, they are leveling up. Before it used to be, let's find, rooming houses were super popular about 5-7 years ago in Sandy Hill, for example. And now that's even changed during COVID. So I think you start to see these bigger developers changing with the times and really pushing the envelope here. And it's awesome to see. You look at some of these complexes, they've got hot tubs in them, they've got pools in them, they've got, pimped out patios. Like these are really, they want to retain tenants in these properties, and they want good quality tenants coming in as well.
Well, yeah, when you're talking about students, the students like who are renting these places, I mean, the reason that they're paying is oftentimes is not the student paying, because the student doesn't have any money, right? It's mom and dad back in Toronto or whatever, and hey, the money's like, they're good for it because they don't want to mess up their credit, right?
It's a good market. It's a good market for lifts too, because, the most that they'll be there is 3-4 years in these properties. So it's easy to increase those rents on that side. There are more issues, I'd say, with garbage and, let's say, cleanliness issues that pop up here and there. But generally speaking, no. I think that's a great clientele to target. But you're also seeing the student rental market is no longer about, 6 bedrooms in a house. It's changed over to being, a nicer quality product. And then that also is kind of coupled with, you're seeing that these hotels have moved into long-term rental housing throughout the pandemic as well, and being bought up. So a lot of these hotels and the quality of the hotel is being transferred in the amenities as well.
My mind goes back to being a tenant and living in one of those houses as like 6 guys in one house.
But it was so fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking like, oh, now if I was going to rent that house out, yeesh, I would not want 6 guys living in one house and all of the stuff that we did. So,
there's definitely like some, I went to Carleton, and there's some over in like Sunnyside and those sort of areas. I'm like, why did you let us do this? Like,
yeah. And I
had a great time.
Yeah. That 20 plus years ago, but it's memories are still there. That's good. Yeah. Cool. It's interesting to see how the landscape is changing, because it feels like a change is sort of imminent, and maybe that's because you're in the mix, right?
I think change is much quicker than we saw previously. And I think you're going to see that. I'm so sorry. Does anyone want to, like, I need an assistant for my phone. I actually have to, but this is like, if anyone wants this. No, I just think, what a great opportunity for investors to get into the market, make some big moves right now, and really switch things up. COVID, big shift of diplomats that came in, took all these Glebe Westboro homes. They have certain requirements that are needed. Why aren't we just replicating this over and over again on that side? There's these great little niche markets that you can tap into. And I think, if you put the right people in play and you have, realtors like yourselves out there looking and hunting for these deals, there's lots of them out there. And Ottawa is such a stable market, and it's great for tenants. A lot of them are government employees. And generally speaking, I would say this is a great market to invest in. And it's also a great market to have tenants in.
So you made a mention that for the last couple of years, the rental rates have been about even, probably for the last 3 years. With the house prices going up as much as they have over the last 2 years, I mean, there's no secret that they've almost doubled, right, over the last 2-3 years, or gone up by 50%. Sorry, not doubled, but maybe they've doubled over 5 years. Do you think that there's an opportunity for the rental prices to also go up, or do you think that they necessarily will, or do you think there's sort of a cap there that they can't really exceed, or do you know? What do you think?
Niche markets, I think, could go up. So like if you looked at, let's say, like if you went east, everyone went west. I think it's time for people to start going Rockland, Wendover, even Orleans, those areas. I think there's good potential on those sides. You look at like an Arnprior, Carleton Place, those sort of things. I think, management companies went there. We started doing credit checks, reference checks, those sort of things, started setting appropriate market rents. So those increased very quickly. And if the same happened, you had a bunch of investors who went east, it would change that market rent as well. I mean, the easiest way to change or get a little bit of lift is to do some renovations on the property, add extra amenities to the property, invest back into your property. That's the easiest way to get things or get that rental lift back out, regardless of where it is, or put strong marketing behind those as well. But if you're looking on Kijiji, Facebook Marketplace, MLS, there's a lot of rental listings that are available right now. So you definitely have to work to get them rented.
Cool. I forgot what I was going to say. It's okay.
Do you think it's the same on your side, like in terms of like purchasing price compared to what these rents are coming back out? Because, I see these duplexes going for mid, low 8s or mid 8s now, and you run those numbers and, how does that work on that side? Like, how do you increase your rental price to get to that?
Yeah, well, you can't, right? And the problem is the cap rates on the bigger buildings are going down. So, but people are hoping on appreciation. I just don't see us doing, 20% growth per year over the next, like that's not sustainable, right? We did 22 years ago and 23 last year, 9% the year before that. I don't think we'll see, in the 20s for appreciation. But it can't be. And so for all of the investors that are coming to the market that we're seeing right now, I really expect that the rents almost have to go up. And, you see these threads on Facebook where people are complaining about how high the rents are now and how unaffordable it is and how ridiculous it is. And it's like, man, stay there, because I worry that it's going to get worse. That's my fear, is that that's going to change, especially as people go and put more capital improvements into the property. So
I really wish for the general public would know that small landlords are not wealthy.
Yes.
A lot of them, it's like $100 or $200 a month, maybe. And that's like best case, your furnace doesn't die. Best case, you don't have to call a locksmith. A plumber's $150 an hour, regardless, minimum call out 1 hour, right? Like best case, nothing happens. You might make $100. So I wish they would know that that's what's happening. Where if you look at obviously like the REITs or those sort of things, that's different. Those are full-fledged businesses, but these smaller landlords, no, they're not. They're not. They're working on their retirement fund slowly and steadily. But I wish the general public, because those feeds can be discouraging, especially to new landlords when they post in these Facebook groups, and then they're told that their rent's too high, but probably what they did is they calculated it out, and their break-even point is probably that rent.
Yeah.
At best. Yeah. Especially if you have, let's say, a Stittsville townhome that you're doing for, unless you're in multis, this is really, really challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
Perfect. Well, I think that's as good a spot as any to wrap things up here. Genevieve, where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you and maybe enroll your expertise in the property management field?
Yeah, flexproperty.ca or short and sweet bnb.com, either of those, or you can always connect with me through email, info@flexproperty.ca.
Can they call you? Can they call you on your phone?
Apparently everyone can. You should see it though. Usually there, I wake up to 62 missed calls, or, when my text messages are under 100, I'm like, good day.
That's great. Awesome. Well, you can connect with us if you want to connect with Genevieve as well. We'll put you in touch as well. You can find us below in the links on Calendly if you want to talk to Sean or I about any of your real estate needs, no matter what they are. Book yourself an appointment in there. Give us a download on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. A like, subscribe, and a share would be wonderful. I'm Brendan McKeigan. This is Genevieve Walton. And with me, as always, is Sean Tasse. Until the next time, keep it real.
Collective.
Nailed it.